The first red flag wasn't Ava Denton's smug little smirk at the Wednesday strategy meeting. It was the silence that followed my update slide: 12 months of pre-dawn calls with Brussels, 18 regulatory appendices, and a cost synergy roadmap so clean you could lick your fingerprints off it, and no one said a word. Not a nod, not a question. Just the CFO clearing his throat and saying, "Let's have Ava walk us through the post-close brand consolidation plan." I was still holding the clicker. I'd seen that look before. Like you're already ghosted, but they're pretending not to know your name until the lease is up. 11 months I'd given this merger. 11. Molding egos like clay, greedy investors, nervous Belgians, our own paranoid Sizo, who still thinks the EU is one giant phishing scheme. I'd carried this thing like a tray of crystal through a frat party. And now I was being sidelined for junior analyst whose only experience with Belgium was probably Stella Artois and TikTok accents. Anyway, if you're listening to this and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, go ahead and do it. 90% of you don't, and I get it, commitment's hard. But if you like hearing about corporate schemes and the quiet people who end up holding the detonator, it really does keep the team motivated. Also, hit like or don't. I'll still be over here doing PowerPoint jiu-jitsu in the dark, back to Ava. She had this unnerving habit of starting every sentence like she was about to cry, then ending it like she'd just won a Nobel. I'm just wondering if maybe we pivot away from Cheryl's compliance-heavy model and lean into agility. Then she'd tilt her head like a golden retriever solving quantum physics. People lapped it up. The CEO's son Mason, who called me ma'am exactly once before I nearly bit through my tongue, started quoting her in leadership meetings. As Ava said, we don't want to over-index on legacy voices. Over-index, legacy voices. That's how I knew I was cooked when MBA Mad Libs replaced common sense. I tried not to let it show. That's the trick. You don't fight in the open. You document, you verify, you loop in legal quietly. You remind them in writing that Clause 14.2d requires leadership continuity until all foreign regulatory approvals are received. You say it once on record, and you do it months in advance. That clause didn't come out of nowhere. I'd written it into the expansion doc myself after watching a similar deal collapse in 2016 when a leadership shuffle scared off the Dutch regulators. It was boring stuff, dry as chalk, but it was binding. It had my name on it. I'd been smart. I'd flagged the clause again during our April audit call. Legal noted it in the minutes. No one batted an eye, because no one, not even Ava in her Zara blazer and LinkedIn optimism, thought they'd be stupid enough to remove me before the close. But corporate stupidity is like mold, it thrives in silence. Within weeks, my name started vanishing from invites. Slide decks showed up in meetings with Ava's initials on cost charts. I'd spent 6 weekends massaging into coherence. Harlan, our CFO, started calling Ava Rising Star. She started calling me Cheryl in that slow, respectful tone people use with hospice patients and retired guidance counselors. The nail? I got an email, short, no salutation, from Harlan. To align with stakeholder expectations, please coordinate with Ava for a phased transition of your merger responsibilities. Your insights will continue to be valuable in an advisory capacity. Translation: pack your stuff. You're now the ghost consultant, but I didn't panic. I printed the email. I highlighted the date. I opened the file folder in my desk drawer labeled insurance, and I slipped the printout in, right behind the certified copy of the clause and the compliance memo I'd sent myself months ago, postmarked, notarized, timestamped. I didn't confront, didn't make noise. Let them think I was tired, checked out, defeated. I even brought in donuts one morning. Ava thought it meant I was letting go with grace. Letting go? Oh, honey. I was just checking the fire exits. 2 weeks after the donut drop, Ava started using my chair, not figuratively. Literally. I walked into the 8th floor war room on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, and there she was, perched in my chair, elbows on my annotated binder, fiddling with a Mont Blanc pen that definitely wasn't hers. She didn't even flinch when she saw me. Just said, "Oh, Cheryl, didn't realize you were still coming to these." Still, like I was a leftover meatloaf in a break room fridge. I stood there longer than necessary, long enough to let her stew in the awkwardness she clearly didn't feel. Then I turned, walked out, and rode the elevator down without pressing a single button. Just needed a moment to remember how not to scream in corporate fluency. Back at my desk, I checked my inbox. The pre-meeting strategy thread, I wasn't CC'd. The analytics run from finance, sent straight to Ava. A legal query from our Brussels counsel, an issue I flagged months ago, forwarded to Ava D. M and a liaison. M and a liaison. Funny. No one told me I'd been replaced, they just updated the cast and hoped the audience wouldn't notice. The tipping point came Thursday afternoon when Harlan summoned me for a quick sync. CFOs don't sync, they plot, but I went anyway, clutching my notes like a freshman clinging to a final paper. "Cheryl," he said, gesturing to a chair that used to be mine when this was still my project. "This isn't a demotion, it's optics." There's that word again. Optics, the golden parachute for every gutless decision in middle management. He continued, "You've been instrumental, truly, but the board feels we need someone who can carry the narrative into post-close. Someone, future-facing. Future-facing apparently meant 28, social media fluent, and photogenic in candlelight. Mason, the CEO's son, had posted a boomerang of Ava at a wine bar with the caption "Deal Queen Crown" the night before. Sinertech's post-merger voice, apparently, was a looping gif of Ava clinking glasses with a hashtag. Harlan smiled like he was doing me a kindness. "So I'd like you to transition key responsibilities to Ava over the next few weeks. You'll retain advisory influence, of course. Advisory influence. Like a haunted doll in a display case, look but don't touch." I didn't argue, that's what they wanted. A fight. A woman scorned, a difficult transition, but I smiled. Said, "Of course, just let me know which files you need unlocked." They didn't know the most important one was already sealed, with timestamps, backdated memos, and legal certifications tucked neatly inside. It was sitting at the bottom of my filing drawer behind a laminated merger flowchart and 3 expired Altoids. I played my part, sent Ava every doc she requested, praised her in the team Slack, even offered to loop her in on a call with the European regulators. She declined. "I think I've got it," she said. "No offense, but it's time for a fresh perspective." Fresh, like supermarket sushi left in the sun. Behind the scenes, she was repositioning herself as the merger's public face. Harlan fed her lines, Mason boosted her on social. I watched my spreadsheets become her decks, my footnotes paraphrased as her market instincts. On the internal comms feed, she started signing off updates as lead strategist. Lead strategist. I hadn't been demoted. I'd been edited softly, subtly, but with surgical precision. Worse, she was doing it while using my own phrasing. My cost synergies, my redline edits, my entire framework, now dressed up in pastel infographics and branded optimism. She even presented my Q2 variance analysis to the board and added a slide with her initials in the corner. The kicker. Mason sent out a calendar invite that Friday. Merger Continuity Task Force Kickoff. 10 names. No Cheryl. I clicked maybe. Then opened my sealed folder, slid in a printout of the invite, and jotted a note. Task force formed without continuity officer participation. Potential breach trigger per 14.2d. Stapled it to a screenshot of her Slack brag. Harlan said, "I'm basically running it now," smiling face with halo. I didn't need a war. I needed witnesses, receipts. One clause, one opening. And Ava, bless her, was sprinting straight into it. The first time Ava claimed my work as her own, it wasn't subtle, it was surgical. She opened the pre-board call like she was hosting a game show, voice all fake humility and botoxed enthusiasm. So I'm excited to walk everyone through the revised synergy forecasts. These are, of course, my projections based on the last few quarters' performance trends. Her projections? I was on mute, camera off, tucked into a corner of my own home office like a ghost in my own obituary. On screen, Ava clicked through slides I'd built, data I'd sourced, massaged, and agonized over every weekend since January. The font still had my custom header style. Slide 6 even had a typo I'd meant to fix and forgot, a copy of my copy. The CFO smiled. Mason gave a thumbs up emoji. Nobody noticed or cared that the fingerprints all over those numbers were mine. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of Cabernet and stared at the stars like they owed me an explanation. I wasn't naive. Not anymore. Not after 30 years of watching men get promoted for speeches I ghost wrote, and watching 20-somethings build thought leadership off my old decks with new gradients. But Ava had been mine. I'd mentored her, helped her navigate the nightmare that was Sinertech's vendor onboarding system. Gave her quiet tips when Harlan tried to ice her out of budget calls. She used to thank me with sticky notes and "You're a lifesaver" in cursive on my desk. Now she was the one taking the mic while I got pulled from the distribution list. I didn't rage, that's what Ava wanted, a confrontation. Something she could point to and say, "See, she's threatened." Instead, I started logging everything, every stolen slide, every missing invite, every instance of her rephrasing my language as hers. If she said consolidated redundancy mapping, I flagged it, because I coined that phrase during a 2 a.m. call with Brussels while she was probably reposting motivational reels on Instagram. I also flagged something else, something none of them had apparently read closely enough. I pulled out the Master Services Agreement from my personal archive, not the sanitized summary Ava had been tossing around, but the full-fat legal version. Printed, tabbed, annotated in the margins with a pen I only used for contracts and postmortems. And there it was, page 187, buried under Section Roman 14 Regulatory Controls. Clause 14.2d. In the event of material leadership change impacting designated continuity officers prior to joint regulatory confirmation, the automatic transfer of operational authority is suspended pending reapproval by all relevant foreign bodies. I reread it 3 times. Ava hadn't just stolen my thunder, she'd stepped into a landmine wearing stilettos. The clause had been my idea, slipped in during an all-hands compliance review 6 months earlier, after our Belgian counterpart warned us their government would pause any cross-border deal if key personnel were altered mid-process. I'd written it, flagged it, and made damn sure it was certified and approved. But because I never made noise, they'd forgotten. They forgot that I was the named continuity officer. They forgot that I was still technically listed as the designated liaison for the Belgian regulator. They forgot that removing me, without formal amendment, without regulator sign-off, nullified the operational handoff clause and froze the deal. Which meant everything Ava was now doing. Every forward-looking synergy plan, every presentation to the board, every brand rollout discussion, legally worthless. I printed the clause, highlighted it, stapled it to the front of my insurance folder. Then I added a sticky note: if they vote, let them. Rage, no, rage burns too fast. This was something colder, slower, steel cooled in snow. They wanted a fresh face. They got one, but I still had the pen. And if you hold the pen long enough, quietly enough, they forget until they feel the tip against their throat. I started showing up to work in beige. Not a metaphor, literal oatmeal sweaters, gray slacks, shoes that whispered instead of clicked. I became a cubicle ghost with a lukewarm tea always in hand. The kind of woman people forget is in the room until they're 3 sentences into a confession. That's exactly how I wanted it. Ava, on the other hand, had gone full victory lap. She floated around the office like she'd just discovered the periodic table. She started referring to herself as executive adjacent. I heard her tell a group of interns that sometimes the baton just passes itself. She'd also gotten really into metaphors. We're flying the plane while building it, she chirped at an investor lunch I wasn't invited to. A week later at a press prep session, she said the merger was like turning a battleship with ballet shoes. Don't even know what that means. But people laughed. Mason began tagging her in internal posts with clapping emojis and lines like "future of the firm right here." Harlan told someone on a leadership call, loud enough that I heard it through the wall, that Ava had emotional intelligence for days and the kind of gut instinct you can't teach. Meanwhile, I pretended to be tired, confused, maybe a little hurt. The aging warhorse gently walking backward out of the spotlight. "Let her run it," I said once in front of Ava. She lit up like a Christmas tree. Behind the curtain, I was very much awake. I met privately with 2 board members, men who liked to think they were above politics, but who remembered which hands had steadied the ship when the pandemic merger fell apart in 2020. I didn't mention Ava. I simply asked if they'd reviewed Clause 14.2D recently. One of them blinked 3 times and said, "It's the continuity one, right?" I smiled and handed him a printed copy. I also scheduled a coffee with Lorraine, our lead regulatory counsel. We met off-site at a forgettable little cafe near the courthouse with good scones and no Wi-Fi. I didn't say much. Just laid out the timeline of events, the missed notifications to Brussels, the task force launch without my involvement. She listened, jaw tightening, then muttered, "They didn't file an amendment, did they?" "Nope." "And you're still the named officer?" "Yup." She exhaled like she'd just smelled a gas leak. Back at the office, I updated the sealed folder in my desk. New timestamp memos, printouts of Ava's internal posts claiming leadership, a PDF of the investor dinner deck with Ava Denton, deal lead on slide 1. I even included a photo of the whiteboard from her war room. Someone had doodled a crown next to her name. Each edition had a sticky note. Each sticky note had a date. Some were numbered. I was building a breadcrumb trail so obvious even a corporate litigator on his 4th divorce could follow it blindfolded. I also dropped small reminders in Slack, per my note from March 14th, or referencing the initial compliance packet, just enough to make it look like I was still engaged, still in the loop. Still technically the liaison. No one challenged it, because no one wanted to make eye contact with the former boss who didn't leave when the music stopped. And Ava, she mistook my silence for surrender, started referring to me in the past tense. When Cheryl was leading before the transition, she even asked if I'd mind taking meeting notes during a branding call. I said of course. Then wrote them by hand on a notepad I'd already marked as exhibit ready. This wasn't a retreat, it was staging. Let her sit at the table. I was just setting the place. It's funny what corporate calls strategy is usually just drama in khakis. But what I was doing, it was actual strategy. Not brainstorms over bagels or slide decks with swoosh animations. No hashtags, no clapping gifs, just the slow, deliberate turning of screws. It started with a manila envelope. I sat at my kitchen table, no music, no wine, no distractions, and drafted a formal breach notice under Clause 14.2D. Clean language, no theatrics. Just a clinical accounting of Ava's assumption of authority, her exclusion of the designated continuity officer, me, and the subsequent violation of the regulatory stipulation binding both firms. I ran it by my external counsel, a woman named Grayson I'd worked with for years. No nonsense. She once sued an ex-employer for trying to claw back her maternity leave. She read the notice and just said, "Damn, that's airtight, we timestamped it." Backdated it to the day Ava formed the task force without notifying the Belgians. I'd already archived all the documentation, calendar invites, Slack screenshots, investor decks with her signature, emails she forwarded to regulators using her own title. Grayson nodded slowly as she flipped through the file. "They never rescinded your designation." "Nope." "And no one amended the clause or notified the oversight committee?" "Nope." She smiled like a woman watching a train she didn't like drive straight into a wall. Next, I reached out to Olivier, the regulatory liaison in Brussels. We'd worked side by side for months, me explaining the tangled spaghetti of American corporate culture, him walking me through every hand-signed stamp the EU still loves so much. Has Ava been in contact? I asked. He blinked, confused. Ava, no. Who is Ava exactly? I explained delicately that there had been an internal realignment of roles and that I'd been, as they say in the States, gently removed from the throne. He frowned. But we have not received replacement documentation. You are still continuity officer. If that changes, the process resets. Understood, I said. Would you be willing to confirm that in writing? He did politely, diplomatically, but with enough bureaucratic steel to make the clause ring like a church bell. I printed the email, stapled it to the breach notice, filed both in the growing file labeled contingency, active. Then came the moment I'd been saving like a ceremonial matchstick. I took the original compliance report I had authored months ago, the one outlining all regulatory obligations under Clause 14.2d, and added a detailed addendum titled Deviation Events, Ava Denton, 03.07 present. It outlined each unauthorized decision made under her leadership, including the investor dinner, press releases, and her documented title change. I printed it on thick cream stock, initialed each page, took it to the post office, requested a notary, signed it under oath, then mailed it to myself. It arrived 3 days later in my mailbox with a perfect federal timestamp. I didn't open it, just slid it into my desk folder behind the whiteboard photo, and Ava's I've basically got this Slack screenshot. Let them call it petty. It was legal. Every whisper Ava turned into a title, every credit she claimed, every seat she slid into like it was warmed for her, that was my rope. I didn't need to tighten it. I just needed to wait until she danced too close to the drop. And she was dancing faster by the day. The week before the quarterly board meeting, Ava strutted past my desk wearing a blazer that still had the tag hanging from the sleeve. That told me two things. One, she wasn't planning on returning it, and two, she thought this was her coronation. Big week, she said, tossing her hair like she'd just secured peace in the Middle East. You coming to the board session, or? She let the sentence trail off like a loose thread on a cheap dress. I'll be attending, I said. Just observing. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't like that. Observers don't clap. They don't endorse. They watch. Ava prefers rooms full of mirrors. I had become a wall. By that point, she was being openly referred to as the future of the firm. The CEO praised her on a shareholder webcast, calling her a dynamic new voice driving strategic vision. Harlan, that spineless weather vane of a CFO, said she brought next-gen energy. A phrase I'm sure he pulled out of some overpriced consultant's report. She'd replaced my gravitas with volume, my silence with selfies, my footnotes with flair. And for most of the board, that was enough. They didn't want continuity, they wanted charisma. Predictability bored them. Headlines thrilled them, and Ava was printing her own. They scheduled a vote for the board meeting to formalize post-merger leadership roles. The email said it like it was a technicality. But I knew what it was. It was the axe. I made no waves, no emails, no last-minute speeches, just a quiet looking forward to attending when asked. Not even Ava could spin that into resistance. Instead, I spent that weekend the same way I used to prepare for budget meetings, methodically, ruthlessly, with jazz on low and a red pen that didn't hesitate. I reviewed every clause again, every timestamp, every moment she had stepped out of her lane and called it a promotion. Then I printed one final set of documents: the breach notice, the regulatory confirmation from Brussels, the notarized compliance report, the annotated timeline of Ava's overreach, a short cover letter signed by my attorney, pre-reviewed, with language so dry it could sand wood. I slipped everything into a navy blue envelope, heavy cardstock, simple gold clasp. I carried it into the office Monday morning like a wedding invitation to a funeral. No one noticed. The office was buzzing with anticipation. Ava had moved into one of the corner conference rooms. She decorated it with eucalyptus and a letterboard that said "Lead" like a lady in crooked plastic font. I watched people peek in, cooing like she'd just had a baby. At lunch, Mason posted a blurry photo of her in front of the Signer Tech logo with the caption, "New Era, #Deal Queen." She liked it from both her accounts. That afternoon, I walked past her open door. She was practicing a speech. I only caught one line, and while Cheryl laid the groundwork, I've had the honor of lifting it into the future. That one stung. Not because she said it, but because she actually believed it. Back at my desk, I opened the drawer, pulled out the sealed envelope, and held it for a beat, the weight of it, the finality. I slipped it into my purse without a word. The moment had finally arrived. Let her climb. The higher the pedestal, the farther the fall. The boardroom smelled like too much cologne and overconfidence. 8 people sat around a glossy walnut table that cost more than my first house. Behind them, floor-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a threat. I took a seat in the corner, observage. No placard, no coffee. Just a chilled bottle of corporate indifference placed 3 inches too far from reach. Ava stood near the head of the table in a lemon-yellow blazer, so blinding it deserved its own non-disclosure agreement. Mason lingered behind her, arms folded like a proud stage dad. Harlan adjusted his cufflinks twice. Everyone else sipped espresso like they were about to witness a routine agenda item, not a low-grade mutiny. The chair cleared his throat. Let's move to the final item, merger leadership continuity. Ava lit up. This was her moment. The room leaned in, not because they cared, but because they smelled performance. And Ava, she came rehearsed. She stepped forward with a pre-folded note card, yes, a note card, and began, as many of you know, I've been leading the integration process for the Siner-Tech-Galdron merger over the past several weeks. With great respect for Cheryl's contributions, the task force has voted to formalize a leadership transition. Effective immediately, we're removing Cheryl Langston from all merger-related operations. She paused, waited for the applause. There were a few polite claps. Harlan nodded like he'd just taste-tested a dry martini. Mason smirked in my direction, probably expecting a tear, a flinch, something. I gave him nothing. I stood slowly, smoothed my jacket, walked forward, not rushed, not angry, just precise. I set my navy envelope down in front of Ava and looked her square in the eye. Here's a parting gift, I said, just loud enough for the room to still. Ava blinked, caught off guard. What's this? Clarity, I said. Something your deck's missing. She reached for it, but the chair cut in, tone suddenly tight. Is this a legal document? Yes, I said calmly. Relevant to the clause you're about to breach. One of the board members, Wilcox, the only one who still read his packets, leaned over and whispered to the chair. Wait, she wasn't officially removed in writing? Ava looked at Harlan. Harlan looked at the floor. The room went still. Ava opened the folder. Her smile evaporated. It started with the certified breach notice. Then came the printed emails, the Slack logs, the timestamp proof of her unauthorized role assumption. The clause 14.2d was printed in bold. Beneath it, Olivier's letter from Brussels. No continuity officer change acknowledged. Any unauthorized leadership transition invalidates merger approval pending recertification. Her hand froze on the notarized compliance packet. I could see her lips moving, reading ahead, trying to find the lifeline. None was there. The chair flipped to the final page. His jaw clenched. We've got a serious problem. Ava stammered, but Harlan said, I said we had board support. Harlan muttered weakly. I assumed Cheryl had been, you assumed? The chair snapped. We're on the brink of invalidating an international deal because you assumed? I stayed silent, let them squirm. One director picked up the phone. Another was already flipping through the legal packet like it was a bomb manual. Ava's voice wobbled. I didn't know about this clause. No one told me, that's why we have continuity officers, I said softly. She looked at me like I'd thrown her off a ledge. In truth, she jumped. I just removed the trampoline. They wanted drama. What they got was doctrine. No yelling, no crying. Just a clause, a folder, and a pen, and I still had mine. Ava kept flipping pages like maybe, if she just turned fast enough, she'd find one that absolved her. She didn't. The folder was a legal autopsy, and every document screamed the same cause of death, arrogance in high heels. Right on top, Clause 14.2d, regulatory continuity requirement. Bold, underlined, annotated in red ink that matched my lipstick. Next, a letter from my attorney, written with the kind of legal calm that only exists to cradle a hammer mid-swing. This notice serves as formal demand for immediate rescission of Ava Denton's interim authority over the Siner-Tech-Galdron merger process. Her unauthorized leadership activity constitutes a material breach of Section Roman 14 and jeopardizes international regulatory alignment. Ava looked like she was trying to read and breathe at the same time and failing at both. Beneath that was the certified breach timeline. Dates, names, calendar invites. A printed screenshot of Ava's Slack message, basically running it now smiling face with halo. Harmless emoji. Damning timestamp. Then the list, 5 pages long, of investor signatories who had reaffirmed me as the named continuity officer. Some of the names on that list hadn't spoken to Ava once, but they remembered who showed up at 6:45 a.m. for every pre-dawn Euro call, who kept the deal alive when half the board was still recovering from their IPO hangovers. Harlan tried to jump in. I mean, look, this doesn't have to be nuclear, he said. Sweat now visible in places that usually stay dry. We can walk this back. I'm sure there's a workaround. There isn't, said Lorraine, our regulatory counsel, standing up with the posture of someone who'd been warning these idiots for months. Per Clause 14.2d, any change to the named continuity officer must be pre-approved by all international regulatory parties prior to operational shift. That didn't happen. This document confirms that. She tapped Olivier's letter for punctuation. His exact words, no new officer acknowledged, no amendment received. Any deviation is considered breach of protocol and triggers a re-review process. Ava looked at Mason. Mason looked at his phone. The CEO's son had finally run out of gifts. I didn't mean to breach anything, Ava mumbled, voice cracking. I didn't even know that clause was in there. Well, I said quietly, that's the difference between drafting a deal and posing with one. No gloating, just fact. The chair leaned back, face pale. If this gets flagged by Brussels, they'll halt certification. Lorraine nodded, and once they re-review, there's no guarantee they won't request updated terms, or worse, rebid. The silence in that room got so thick you could have spread it on toast. One board member turned to Harlan. Did you sign off on this? I thought Cheryl had stepped down, you thought. Wilcox, still flipping through the folder, said what no one else wanted to. This isn't a stumble. This is a procedural collapse. Every presentation Ava's given, every decision made under her direction, it's all potentially void. Ava finally looked at me, really looked at me. Like maybe now she saw what I was made of. Not bitterness, not revenge, structure. Discipline, and a clause she never even saw coming. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The air had shifted. The room that once rolled its eyes at my caution was now gripping the sides of their chairs like passengers mid-turbulence. And I just sat back, let the altitude drop, let them feel the claws hit. The silence in that boardroom was the kind that doesn't follow drama, it follows revelation. No shouting, no apologies, just the dawning awareness that they'd handed the keys to someone who never read the map. Ava sat frozen, one manicured hand still clutching the now useless folder like it might suddenly change its contents out of mercy. It wouldn't. The chair rubbed his temples and said, flatly, we need to correct course immediately. Lorraine nodded. That begins by reinstating the continuity structure as defined in the original documentation. Cheryl is, by every legal and procedural metric, still the officer of record. It wasn't a suggestion, and that was my cue. I stood without hurry, walked to the head of the table, the seat Ava had claimed in every meeting for the past 2 months, and gently picked up the deal binder she'd been using. I didn't even look at her. The binder had tabs in the wrong places. A bullet point font I hadn't used since 2015. It smelled like perfume and premature celebration. I carried it to the side table and set it down, quietly, finally. Then returned to the head of the room with my own binder, thicker, worn, corners dog-eared from late nights and real work. I placed it in front of me, centered it, and clicked it open. Then, just loud enough for the room to feel the temperature shift, I said, let's continue where I left off unless you'd rather start over with the regulators. The chair didn't even blink. No, proceed, no more votes, no more optics, no more Ava. Mason vanished into his phone. Harlan stared at his lap like maybe there was a trapdoor. Ava didn't move at all, just kept her eyes fixed on the middle distance, face slack, voice gone. I began walking the board through the updated cost synergies, the partner transition strategy, the regulatory next steps, all of which had been frozen in place since they cut me out. But now they listened, really listened, not because I raised my voice, because I never had to. Halfway through, Wilcox nodded and murmured, we should have stuck with this from the start. And I just kept going, slide after slide, fact after fact, prepared, quiet, irrefutable. And as I flipped to the final summary page, I glanced toward the folder still lying open in front of Ava, its documents splayed like bones in a forensic scene. They had tried to erase me, tried to replace caution with charisma, structure with spectacle. But the deal hadn't moved forward until I did. They gave her a vote. I wrote the rules. Still my pen. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.